Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session. Thank you for turning up for this session. I thought before we go into the worksheet, I thought it would be better if I give you the background of the program first, so that we can set this course in its proper context. So let me just give a brief overview of this Master of Teaching and Learning program first. The one important assumption of this program is this question of the uncertainty of the teaching situation. Things are very fluid when you go into the classroom. So teachers are required to make lots of decisions, right, in the classroom itself. So, and very often there are a lot of issues, there are a lot of dilemmas involved, as opposed to when they learn in theory. Things are very predictable. Whereas when if you were to go to the classroom, then things are unpredictable. So as a consequence of this, what this course tries to do is that through this learning area, we are trying to help them to develop their judgment. That's why they are constantly asked to look back at what they do, why they do what they do. So as you mentor them, bear this in mind. Bear this in mind, because often we need to know the context of the situation. Not so much about what we assume, but more in terms of what really happened. So we need to get those information from them before we can give advice to them in terms of what to do. So it is a good idea when we mentor them to question them, what is the situation here? Why do you make this particular decision in this particular case? So that we want them to ground their judgment in terms of what they learn, but taking into account the context of the situation they are in. So often we need more information from them as we mentor them. We cannot jump ahead and assume that it's going to happen. Then as if we are assuming that things are going to run very smoothly. So things are in a bit of flux here. So it's quite, in a sense, it can be difficult to mentor them.
It's very difficult if they're not in a classroom.
That's right.
And they're not teachers.
That's right.
That's my dilemma.
Right.
Yeah.
I understand that. Okay. That's just my dilemma too, because this course assumes that they are teaching. They have classroom experience, because we want them to reflect back on what they do and that sort of thing. So the third point is important here. Good teaching requires sound professional judgment and decision, okay, which rests on the quality of the situational understanding of teachers. So the thing that we want to emphasize in this learning area is that their judgment. So constantly we are trying to figure out how do they come to this decision. We want to help them to make good decision in respect of their particular situation.
So can I ask a question, because I'm new to this? The students are studying the theory in the university,
Yeah.
and we are going to discuss the practice with them in their work.
Yes, most students are teachers actually. I said most.
Most.
Yes,
okay.
Some are not.
Right.
So there's a dilemma there.
Okay.
See, when they are not teachers, so when we ask them about the practice, now they have not been practicing.
Okay, and just for example, there's someone whose background is hospitality work,
Right.
and they're on the MTL course.
Yeah.
Are they looking to teach within the hospitality?
Most of them are in career path. They're planning to change once they qualify. They will resign. Now we have a lawyer.
They're planning to go into the classroom, school classroom. Okay.
Right, we have a new student recruited. She's a lawyer, a flight stewardess.
A lawyer flight student.
But she decided that teaching is a calling, so she's in the midst of career change. She can't get a job until she gets a teaching qualification. So this is the dilemma we are handling with. She wants to change career. She's using her enrollment in this course to solicit a job at the moment. Hopefully she'll get a job soon and then she'll be a full-time teaching staff somewhere. But currently she's a flight stewardess who is a trained lawyer.
This was a question I was asked at Sri Garden. A lot of the teachers there have got degrees, but they don't have a teaching qualification. Is this qualification acceptable nationally? So
nationally,
they want to go, yeah.
Because I mean, TELUS, we don't offer all those shorty things. We are recognized by the Malaysian Qualification Agency.
Right, as a teaching qualification.
Could I just add, we are in the midst of collaboration with University of Western Australia. They recognize our MTL and PGCE, and therefore students who do both these programs will get exemptions for their Master of Education, which is different from a Master of Teaching and Learning, and it's also a pathway for their PhD. So that is something that we will be announcing very shortly once we sign our MOU with them.
Okay, all right. So basically what MTL tries to do is to, to put the students on a strong foundation in terms of making professional judgment. So our role basically as mentor is to help them towards that direction, to develop the judgment in terms of the situation that they are in. What we emphasize here in this MTL is what we call functional knowledge, not just declarative knowledge. Declarative knowledge are those kind of knowledge in which you teach them about, let's say, learning theory, and then during exam time, then you ask them, well, what does the chap say about this theory? Then they just tell us. We tell them, then they tell us back. But in this case, we want them to use that knowledge. This is what we call functional knowledge. So when it comes to functional knowledge, things are more fluid. Things are more complex. Things are less predictable. Okay, this is where your experience come in terms of helping them to make this judgment. Next. So, back to this, what you call this course, this learning area concerning assessment. What we try to do here is that the main goal is to develop student into reflective practitioner through engagement with the tasks in the learning area. So constantly they are asked to reflect. So it's not a question of just transferring what they have learned into practice. Things are more complex than that. Okay, things are much more complex than that. And during the course itself, which I'm teaching, this course assessment I'm teaching, okay, we emphasize three purposes of assessment. That is assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and assessment of learning. Okay. So let me just give you the learning outcome of the course so that you know what's the learning outcome of this course. So there are 4 main learning outcomes. The first one is on completion of this course, this learning area, they're supposed to be able to judiciously apply the understanding of the principles and practice of good mathematics assessment, science assessment, whatever the subject, okay, to a learning environment. Second is to justify the critical roles played by the subject, okay, maths assessment or whatever, in promoting, enhancing and sustaining learning in that particular subject and improving teaching in that particular subject. And third is to use the assessment results that they have obtained appropriately in terms of the data that they have gathered, then how are they going to use it appropriately. And fourth is we also put that in terms of they are supposed to be able to work independently, and we hope also that they will discuss among themselves in teams. So these are the learning outcomes. So bear in mind this learning outcome as we supervise them. Next. So the basic model that we use is something like this. This is what we call constructive alignment. Okay, we have the learning outcome in which the way we state the intended learning outcome, the way we state the intended learning outcome is that there is the level of learning that is required and there is the content. So if you were to go back, for instance, the learning outcome there, if judiciously apply. That is the level that we want to apply. Apply what? The content is principles and practice of good assessment. So the level that is required is to be able to apply. But apply in an informed way. And about what? About the principles and practice of good assessment. So can you just go back? So that's the intended learning outcome. Right? Last semester, when they were doing this course about teaching and learning, the way they designed their teaching and learning, they were supposed to align that teaching and learning to the learning outcomes of the course or the subject that they are teaching. Okay, so as I think if you can recall, for those who were involved in this the course last semester, right? So one of the things, a few things that we asked them, we want to, how do you design this? How does it relate to the learning outcome? Blah, blah, blah. So we want to make sure that they're aligned. Because the whole purpose of the teaching learning activities and assessment tasks is to support students to achieve the intended learning outcome. So constantly we must bring them back to this notion of intended learning outcome. We do not want them to veer off in different directions, as if there's no coherence in that.
That was one thing that I came to partway through the last semester, was
Right.
That if the students actually read through each of the assignments, they could see how they built on each other.
Right, that's right.
And to create one big assignment in
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And it scaffolded them through that process.
Yeah.
And so I was able to alert my students to that. So
Yeah.
read all of the questions first, so you're not repeating yourself constantly, but you are building on what you've already said. So, yeah.
Yes, that's a good point.
Good.
Yeah, that's it. Because we need to see this coherence, you know.
Yes, that's right.
The coherence of the whole thing, you know, rather than treating each task as separately from the others. So now we are here, basically. We are here. Okay, the assessment task. So we want to ensure that the way they approach this assessment is aligned to support students to achieve the intended learning outcomes. Right, thanks. Now, this is an overview of the learning area. So I put there several parts. Later we will go to the worksheet itself. Now the first part, which is part B of your worksheet, is that the learning area is that they will be asked about why choose this assessment method. Firstly, the focus will be on assessment for learning. After that, the focus will be on assessment of learning. There's only one small part that has to do with assessment as learning. Only one small part. So for instance, the first part let's say if we take assessment for learning, why choose this assessment method? So when they design the course, they may have chosen projects as their assessment for learning. Let's say the project will take, let's say, 6-7 weeks, something like that. Why choose this method? Or if they have chosen portfolio, why choose this method? They need to have good reasons for choosing this method. This is where their judgment comes in. Will the method that they have chosen, will it be able to support the students' learning to achieve the intended learning outcome? The key word there is that the method must be able to support the students to achieve the intended learning outcome. All the time, they must link it to the intended learning outcome.
The intended learning outcome was from the previous module?
Yes. If not, then you have to ask them to share with you what is your intended learning outcome. Therefore, before you give them advice or anything, you need to look at the intended learning outcome. Yes.
So they were actually very learned. So do they go through a workshop like this before they start in the module?
In this assessment course that I'm teaching now, I teach them all these things about intended learning outcome, blah, blah, blah. Alright? In this course that I'm teaching now, I emphasize on that. that it is important for them to constantly look at the intended learning outcome. So that's the question. The next question is, how was the assessment linked to the curriculum content? So they need to look. That means that they cannot think of assessment as something that is an afterthought. We don't want them to approach assessment that way. It is planned ahead. In fact, before the course start itself, even before the course start, that they should think about assessment straight away. Not in the midst of everything, then start to, okay, what assessment method shall I use here? So it needs to be integrated, okay, in the curriculum itself. Next question, how was the task and the marking scheme designed? How do you design the task? How do you design the marking scheme? Okay, so you see the main point here is that constantly we need to know where they come from. This is the crucial thing here. That's why there needs to be a lot of conversation between you and them, Need to have a lot of conversation. If you don't have this kind of conversation, it's difficult for us to give them proper advice regarding this thing. Because the key word there is that to exercise sound judgment in their particular context. So we need to have information about the context, about where they come from. So how was the task and the marking scheme designed?
They have to show the marking scheme?
Yes, they have to. Later on, they have to provide you with the sample. They have to provide you with the sample of their task.
And with that, I get a bit concerned about the use of the term marking scheme, because the assessment may not involve marking. It might be using a rubric for periodic assessment. So
yes.
That would be acceptable as...
Yes, that would be acceptable.
It doesn't have to be a mark.
It doesn't have to be a mark. It can be a qualitative kind of thing. It need not be a
Student reflective journal?
Come again?
Student reflective journal? If they use a student reflective journal as a assessment?
If that's the task that they give, right, and that task is aligned to the intended learning outcome, that's fine. The key thing there is must be aligned to the intended learning outcome.
So they will still have to provide the marking scheme for them?
Yes, in terms of how they judge the quality of the point raised is important here regarding the marking scheme. We need them to have some way of judging the quality of the students' work. It can be in the form of rubric, it can be in the form of marking scheme or whatever, okay? But there needs to be this transparency in this sort of thing, in how they come to the judgment that they have made. So, the fourth point is that how will the question of validity, reliability, and this workability handle? How do they handle this sort of thing? In terms of the quality of the data that they get, how do they handle this sort of thing? Things to do with validity is about the extent to which, if I can use the term measure in a broad way, right? Does it measure what it is supposed to measure in the sense of what it is intended to do? Does it tell you about the things that you want to know about if you were to use that method of assessment, given the data that you collect?
And do you link having clear and transparent success criteria with that? So when you talk about validity, reliability and workability, I immediately think of assessment of learning rather than assessment for learning.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in assessment for learning, those things are slightly different.
Yes.
Yeah.
In terms of assessment for learning, the way we look at validity is in terms of the effectiveness of what we do.
Back to the success criteria.
Right. So not in the sense of assessment of learning. But assessment of learning we look at it in a different way. But for assessment for learning, the way we look at the validity question is in terms of the effectiveness of how we support them. So bear that in mind too, regarding this thing. If you are not sure about this thing, please just go and read about these things, before you support them. So that is the question. How do they handle this sort of thing? In terms to ensure the data that they get, and from there how they can support the students to achieve the intended learning outcomes. So next question has to do with what other steps were taken to be in line with the principles and practice of good assessment. So principle and practice of good assessment is not just about aligning to the learning outcome, not just a matter of validity question, reliability question. There are other things that needs to be taken into considerations. Okay? So what other steps have they taken in respect to that? And lastly, is about justify the learning theories underpinning the assessment method chosen. For instance, if they were to choose, let's say, projects or whatever, then the learning theory underpinning are mostly about constructivism. As students construct their understanding, and we get feedback, we get data from them, then we give them feedback, so that they can align the understanding with the proper understanding that we want them to get, because they may understand things in a different way. So underpinning that is this notion of the theory of learning, the constructivist theory of learning. Whereas if they were to use assessment method that hopefully they don't, if they use multiple choice question and that sort of thing, right? Then how can they support students' learning? And multiple choice questions are mostly underpinned by behaviorist theories of learning and that sort of thing. Okay, so justify these learning theories underpinning the assessment method that they have chosen. They have to justify. So they have to tell us why they do what they do. At times, they don't understand the question, so we need to prompt them. Now the question here asks you about why. We don't have to tell them the answer or what. You just have the question here asks about why. Explain why. Full stop. That's it. Ask them to explain. Okay, next. Okay, the next part of this learning area is a matter of interpreting and using assessment data. Assessment for learning and assessment of learning data. So, how has the data been analyzed and interpreted? The analysis need not be in a quantitative sense only. It can be in the qualitative sense. Okay? It need not be in a quantitative sense. They need not approach it in a statistical way. They can analyze it qualitatively to get a sense of where the students are in their learning in order to support them. Given the data collected, what has been learned about the learner's learning from the data? We ask them about that too. So, after they have gathered the data, what do they think about where the students are in their learning? After that, it's about how has feedback been provided based on the data. How has they given feedback to the students? And we require them to provide a sample of the feedback too, that they have given to their students. In giving this feedback, what issues arise? Okay? And how do they deal with it? And lastly, it's about how has the assessment outcome used to develop the learner's learning? How have they used the data to support their students' learning in the direction of the intended learning outcome? So this is about interpreting and using assessment for and of learning. So you have sections in which the same question will be posed for assessment for learning, and the same set of questions will be posed for assessment of learning. Thanks. This is where they are asked to provide samples of assessment tasks, okay? Sample of marking scheme or rubric that they have used, examples of students' work, high, middle, low, that sort of thing, and the feedback that they have given. All right.
Students are not in the teaching process, how are you going to provide feedback?
You're supposed to leverage on your expertise and your area, supposedly, that is the need to cooperate. I mean, you collaborate with them, you don't actually just give them away. You walk them through how you have constructed them in your field.
I sent my students to 2 schools to sit in classrooms and get the experience before they answer those questions in the first module. So it enables them to get a feel for, so it might be a good idea for them to contact local schools and actually go in and see what's happening.
As I said, people join our course for so many different reasons.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
Do you allow students to assess like workplace learning? Does the program allow that? Like if let's say the students, they don't have classroom experience, but they've got their colleagues, or probably he or she is conducting lessons like communications. So probably the person is in communication department or something, HR departments, they have programs there. Do you allow them to do that and then use that, look at adult learners assessment?
It's something that we were brainstorming, because currently MQA, based on the way we have submitted our documentation to MQA, we have documented in a way it's teacher training for 4 disciplines. It's something that we have more demand. We call it, they want to become trainers and things like that, right? So they've requested whether they could join the program and become a trainer. Yeah, you can come and benefit from the learning theory and all that, but all the assignments still justifies what the way we have submitted to the government. We are training teachers, and therefore all the assignments and things are working around the notion of training teachers. In the future, nothing to say that we could, have another group of students coming as trainers and doing work-based. Something that you can work on. But currently, because one of the reasons is we are trying to tell students that our students' assignments are focused on one discipline, that is the 4 disciplines: science, maths, education, social science. Then it will be unfair on the students to get a title saying that they are focused on science, but actually done work on something else other than science.
Right, thanks.
In your module, you always mention B, C, and D, which actually relates to the same objectives, worded in a different way. Like, for instance, you have objective 1 is assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and assessment of learning.
Okay.
So there are actually 3 separate objectives based on the same data that they have collected. Now, one of my students, is that she doesn't know where to split this. So out of the 3 sections, she will give the same answer.
It shouldn't be the same data. If they give assessment for learning, then they basically is about projects, blah blah blah. When we talk about assessment of learning, it's basically things that is at the end that they assess. That they can do. They can't do anything about it already, in terms of supporting the students' learning.
In part B, we have determined whether assessment is reliable, valid, workable.
Right.
Then in part D, there's another one. Have you ensured that these assessments of learning tasks are reliable, valid, and workable?
Right.
You expect them to give different answers.
Yes. Yes.
One of my students, especially because she's not in the teaching profession, she's very confused and she keeps repeating the same thing in all the parts.
I see. Okay.
So she does not quite understand the question. So I was wondering whether when students get this module, they will actually given an explanation of what is expected of each of the parts.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Because one of my students, she will keep saying the same thing in all the sections because she view it like it is almost the same answer. So she repeated again and again and again.
The important thing itself is that during the course itself, right, an emphasis must be put on application. During the course itself, if the course itself is conducted in such a way that it's theoretical, right, the students will have problems when it comes to this.
So like in part E, we have this part where the validity of the assessment.
Right.
How would you expect students' answer to be in that part?
As I mentioned earlier, in respect of the assessment for learning, validity is anchored in terms of the effectiveness of the measures taken to support the students' learning. Whereas in respect of the assessment of learning, validity is taken in respect of to what extent does it reflect the intended learning outcome, in the sense of does it sample, because when we do assessment of learning, basically what we do is end of the term is that we sample from the content. Does the content reflect, does the task that we pose reflect the intended learning outcome or not? So it's a question of sampling there. In terms of does it measure in terms of what it's supposed to measure? So there's a question of sampling there. They need to come up with they need to come up with an assessment plan, in the sense of mapping the item that they use in respect of the content and in respect of the level that is required in that intended learning outcome.
So in the section D, if you ask, how have you ensured that these assessment of learning tasks are reliable, valid, and workable? How is that different from part B? What is the expectation from
Part B is they will have to argue in terms of the effectiveness of the support that they have given them, whether the students have moved forward in terms of that. Okay.
So how have they ensured they will give the rubric, but they have already provided earlier?
No. There is not a question of rubric in terms of the feedback they have given, right? Whether that feedback has been effective in moving the students forward in supporting their learning. If they argue along that line, then they wouldn't go, off tangent. Because the notion of validity here is in terms of the effectiveness of the feedback they have given to support the students in their learning. So they need to see from that point of view, rather than see from the point of view of assessment of learning, more or less in terms of this sampling that I've talked about just now, in terms of the mapping to the intended learning outcome. Because as the student do this assessment for learning, right, it's over a period. They are constantly moving at different stages. Let's say they are doing projects, the first phase, the second phase. As the students move along this project, then the teacher is gathering data from the students concerning where they are and supporting them along the way. So it is that thing that they have taken, that they have done, that they use to assess to what extent that the measures that they have taken is valid or not, in terms of the effectiveness of the support that they have given. That's what we look for, in the sense of assessment for learning. But assessment of learning, we look at it from a different point of view. We need to look at, well, how do they come up with this set of tasks? Let's say in the exam paper or whatever. Alright? How do they come up with this set of tasks? Does this set of tasks reflect the intended learning outcome? Does it reflect the content of the curriculum? Because the task that they have used is basically a sampling. They are just sampling. They cannot ask everything that is in the curriculum. But does the sample reflect the content or not? So the notion of validity there is different from the notion of validity when it comes to assessment for learning. Okay, does that help in that? Okay, right. So the last part is they have to write reflections concerning, for example, what step they have taken to do research and to develop the method of assessment that they have chosen. What are the highlights of the assessment for and of learning that motivated and encouraged the learners? Now these are just guidelines. If they want to write about other things, that's fine. We do not want to really put to be very specific about this thing. We want to talk about other things that is important to them.
How much do you touch on feedback in this session?
Touch on, sorry?
Feedback.
All right.
So is this the main vehicle for teaching them how to give feedback, or does that come in another session?
I don't quite...
Well, teachers giving feedback to learners is very complex. I take about 6 weeks to work with teachers on that when I'm working in schools.
Okay.
So do you spend longer talking about feedback at another part of the course, or does it come within the assessment part?
Oh, during the course itself also we discuss about feedback.
Yeah, okay.
During the course itself also we
So
discuss.
you're not expecting great detail about feedback in here, about prompts and levels of prompts and that sort of thing?
No. You're not expecting that, right? So for example, during the course itself, I emphasize on how to get feedback, the nature of the feedback. It needs to be descriptive, it cannot be in terms of grade, blah, blah, blah.
It's mentioned in here, and I wondered to what depth we needed to look with the students responding.
Right, okay. Right. So the third part is based on the feedback from the learners, what changes will we make to the design of the assessment for and of learning in the future, and what they have learned from the...
How do they do that if they're not in school?
Yeah, that's a dilemma again, right?
Is there any requirement for them to go in to the schools? Is there no actual requirement? It's just we can only suggest.
It is, if you were to ask my opinion, it is a requirement for them to go to the classroom, you know, because then only they can discuss about this thing in an informed way.
Theoretical.
That's right.
From the
Right.
internet.
Yeah, in an informed way, right. They need hands-on experience. That's the crux of the matter, right?
I know my student gained an awful lot. She spent a day at Sri Garden and a day at Nexus, and it really opened her eyes to what it looks like in practice.
Yes.
Is it possible for the school education of further agency to arrange for some of the non-teaching students to go to schools?
Well, it all depends where they have chosen their specialization. They may not have chosen a school. They may have chosen a...
Just go back to the worksheet.
We try to help. You know, we can only make the connections, but they will have to. But we did say that we'll help.
Because of assessment, they cannot just follow the mentor for 1 or 2 lessons and then...
For example, I have a mentee who goes to Sri Garden and works with R&D who's there. So we do connect people, and it's very much constrained of work and everything else, but the opportunities are definitely there.
So any other issues you want to raise regarding this thing? If not, let's look at the worksheet itself, all right? Okay, this part A is basically to gather some information about them, about where they come from. Okay?
Will it be a repeat for those students who are doing this assessment?
Yeah, but these are not marked here. So it's just...
No, but the thing is that when it comes to assessment, we want them to talk about relate to assessment. It's not the same.
Okay.
It's not the same. So, what do you expect to learn about principle in relation to the concept you just described? So we want them to describe the context in relation to assessment, not just about in general.
So the first part, A1 to A4, you do not expect anything from us, right? And cause feedback.
Well, if right, I mean A4 is important there. A4, especially A4. We need to know their context in relation to assessment practices.
So what kind of feedback are you expecting from us as mentor here? I don't really...
Okay, that's a good question. Useful information are detailed information. If they talk in general, then we don't get a sense of where they are coming from. Then it's difficult for us to help them. So as far as possible, we want them to write in a detailed manner.
So my response would be that if I don't think that the student has responded in a detailed manner, then I would ask her to be more specific.
No, you can say, I don't really understand your context. Can you please provide a more detailed description?
You'll talk her through it like to bring it out.
Okay.
The context, it says, in relation to the context you just described. So where should they
The
have
institutional.
In terms of
the context of the institution and the learners.
right.
Okay, thanks.
In terms of that context.
Okay.
The guideline here is that we need information about this so that we can, the support that we can give them, right, is in line with what they need. We are assessing their learning needs here, you know. So we are trying to get a sense of while they are doing assessment, we are also doing assessment here in terms of we are assessing their needs, of how we can meet them in terms of their learning needs.
So for those who are not teaching, they are learners also.
They are supposed to emulate the mentor. That's why you are here, is to provide. But in some cases, for example, in your case, the students are already reasonably gainfully employed. So you don't have to go out of the way. There are a few difficult persons, like Rosie has a difficult case. Rosie's case is more complex because the person has never worked in the class. At least in your case, it's a retired teacher. At least on principle.
And she's away for the whole of this one.
Yeah, but on paper, she's at least a retired teacher. As I said, you know, in a perfect world, we'll only take teachers. But then it's funny to justify the other law. We take teachers to make them teachers. You know, the whole idea of the justification is to take non-teachers and make them.
This is where it shouldn't really be a master's.
Because
there should be 2 levels.
2 levels. It's something that we are working on. But currently, based on the demographics, we are stuck with this model. So that's one of the reasons why we have mentors, is because the mentors help to provide the services, the support that they can't get otherwise.
If the students are sitting for the public examinations, so yes, the teachers are out of control on the assessment.
Yes.
How are they going to work on
So that is, I mean, yeah, that's a big flaw in the whole. But last Friday also I was in Srihatamath, and then so many things we talked about, most of them said, you know, it doesn't apply to me because I'm teaching AL, I'm teaching, you know, all the standardized testing. But the point is, how do you become effective in class? A lot of these things, it's part of the day-to-day job. Obviously, yeah, the overall summative exam is out of the control, but there are a lot of these things you can actually use to generate the learning experience for the student. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, let's look at this part B, right? Now, for one of the methods of assessment for learning, for one of the methods of assessment for learning, you have used in the curriculum you have designed. The thing about the students are that some of them have undertaken this curriculum course with Dr. Logan. So, in taking that course, they have designed a curriculum. Some of them have not done so. Even for those who have taken the curriculum course, many of them, they don't like the curriculum that they have designed at that point in time. So they may they may want to design another curriculum for this course. Okay? Or they may want to choose a curriculum that has been designed by others and use that as a reference point. So it is up to them in this situation. Okay? The choice is theirs. So that's why it's written in such a way that used in the curriculum you design in the curriculum design module, or the curriculum you have used in the subject or course you teach. Okay? So the question there is that, why did you choose this method of assessment, or why was this method of assessment chosen? If they have not made the decision, why was it chosen from their point of view? So they have to give reasons there. B2, for the method of assessment chosen in B1, how was the assessment material linked to the content of the curriculum? So they need to be able to link the assessment task to the curriculum content. Here again, they need to describe. Okay, they need to explain to us B3, for the assessment for learning chosen, how have you designed the task and the marking scheme or the rubric? Later we'll change that to include in a more general form rather than confine it to just marking scheme. So how have they designed this? Yes. Yes.
They can just choose one concept curriculum or one topic. B2.
Yes, they can just, if that's what they want to focus on. They don't have to talk in terms of the whole course, They can talk in the context of just one topic. How is it related? B4, right? How have you ensured? I think ensured is not a good word. How have they handled this thing, rather than ensured? All right. How have they engaged with this question of validity or whether it's workable or not? The task that they have chosen, in terms of the time constraint and that sort of thing. So later we'll change the word ensured to how have they handled this question of validity and reliability and that sort. Similarly with B5, okay? B5 concerns how have you ensured that the assessment for learning chosen follow the principles and practice of good assessment other than the one mentioned in B2, B3, B4. There are other things that they need to take into account, in terms of transparency of the criteria that they have used to judge students' work, so that the students also get a sense of what quality work look like. B6, as I mentioned earlier, for assessment for learning chosen in B1, justify the learning theories or theories underpinning it. Okay, so we want them to understand that all assessment methods have a theory of learning underpinning it. So it puts assessment on the psychological foundations too, not just assessment for assessment's sake. Okay, so B7, earlier I mentioned there's only one small part about assessment as learning. That's in B7. Assessment as learning are those kind of assessment in which we use so that by doing this task, the student can monitor their own learning. It's about metacognition, right? It's about reflection, about strategies they use. They think about the strategies they use and how they can improve on that. It's about trying to make them to be able to assess their own work. This is the notion of assessment as learning. Okay? As learning. Part C. Okay. Part C is about data. Okay? It's about data, using data, but in the context of assessment for learning. Okay? In the context of assessment for learning. So how have you analyzed and interpreted the data from the assessment for learning task for whatever subject? Okay, you have discussed in B. How have you used this data? How have you analyzed and how have you used this data? Interpret this data. C2, what have you learned about your learner's learning after analyzing and interpreting the data from the assessment for learning task you have discussed in B? Okay, so what have you learned about your learner's learning? So again, they have to give us a description. When they describe this thing, try to discourage them from describing this thing in general. Because some of them, they tend to describe in general. So, if they were to teach a certain topic, right, then we want them to describe in the context of that topic, rather than in general. How have you provided feedback about the assessment for learning results to the students? So they need to give a description of the sort of how they have given feedback to their students concerning these things. What issues did you experience in communicating this information and how did you deal with them? Okay, so there are a number of issues that might arise. Some issues might have to do with ethical issues or whatever. And how do they deal with those kind of situations? As I've said, right, before you can support them in this, you need detailed information about the situation they are in. And if you are together with them, it's very helpful. Because then you can understand their context, blah, blah, blah. The problem is that for some of us, we are not with them. So we don't really know their context well enough unless you talk to them often, right? You ask them to describe in detail the situation. Where are we now? Okay. How did the outcome? C5, right? How did the outcomes of assessment for learning, for whatever subject, enable you to help learners develop their mathematics learning or science learning? There might be some overlap in this question. It's not necessary that everything is mutually exclusive. Okay, but even though some overlap, some of the tasks require them to describe in greater detail. C6 is sample for assessment, so this insert here. You see the word? They have to insert the task and the marking scheme or the rubric, or the way they go about evaluating the student. They can just provide a brief description and the criteria that they use. Yes?
Just a quick question regarding like C, some parts like how have you provided feedback and all this. Can we request students to provide samples?
Of course. Later on they'll be required to provide samples too. Here. Can you go to C7?
Because for C6 you mentioned that specifically they need to provide samples. For others, that's why I'm asking, can we ask from them?
I think you can ask because you want as much information about it as possible. If they have done this, right, it's just giving to you only.
It does say insert samples.
So
for C6 no problem, like some other parts like C3 or some other part. Sometimes I find it very useful if, let's say, they said that they say this, they provide such a feedback and that is the reason for them to do so. Why do they give such a feedback? If they could give us some examples.
Yes, sure. That's a good question that you have raised. Again, it goes back to we need detailed information before we can provide the proper support for them. So like C7 for instance, right, they should provide us with examples of students' work in response to the assessment task. Okay? And they need to show also, they will show your feedback to the learners, the kind of feedback that they give to the learners. Insert examples of high, middle and low performance. Yeah? And part D, okay, part D is a repeat of part B and part C, but in the context of assessment of learning. Just now it was about assessment for learning. So the question posed are similar. Okay, so let's just move on to part D, part E, F, part F, because it's a repeat, right? Part S is this reflective report that they have to write. Now, although we structure it like this, reflection needs to be coherent. It's not parts by part like that. So they may choose to write, one long essay like that, right? Incorporating this thing. Fine. Personally, I do not want them to write reflection in such a way that this question you answer, this is a question you answer, this is a question you answer. And also, this need not be the only thing that they write about, because reflection is also about things that are significant to them in terms of the experience that they go to in the context of the assessment that they carry out.
You haven't put a word limit on.
Yes, we are going to put the word. Yeah.
So
we are going to put the word limits there.
mentioned.
Yeah, I'm going to put the word limit there. Okay, there'll be a word limits.
For each part.
Yes. But do not be too strict with this word limit. Okay.
Just now, you raised a very good question.
Okay.
Regarding point saying that reflective report can be what do you call it?
One lot. Yeah.
If let's say student chose to do part F to answer all these questions instead of breaking them into different parts, if they said I just want to write a full bit and it includes all these elements that we included.
That's fine.
So that's fine.
That's fine.
As long as they stick to the
Yes, that's fine.
And answer the question.
Yes, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. They don't have to follow column by column.
Yes.
If they just choose one column and I want to say everything in this column, but it covers the 3 things, that's fine. Right? That's fine. Okay, I guess that's more or less the things that I want to emphasize here. Is there any question that you want to raise or something like that? Or any issues that you face, so that we can improve ourselves? If you can give us some feedback concerning the experience of mentoring the students.